Joe, for having me. Thanks for GeniusDen. I love the crowd. I love the kind of the high-tech, high startup kind of space. So I love talking with folks. One of my passions in life is help people overcome challenges and kind of get to the next level. And so I take it from anywhere from my youth sports coaching with my 3 boys to any of my clients who I'm trying to coach and help get to the next level, to any friend or somebody who's out of work trying to find their next job, helping them think about their career. So I love challenges. So if you guys have anything you want to talk about, taking a company national, building a business, anything like that, I'd love to chat with you. First of all, a couple things you should know about me. So we've got HireBetter is based in Austin. I did live in Dallas for 6 years, from 1996 to 2002, where I founded probably my most successful company, which is called the Controller Group. I grew up in South Louisiana, and I went to the University of Arkansas, and I've lived in Texas for almost 20 years. So I've got redneck, UMass, and hillbilly kind of all rolled into one. So you hear an accent, you probably heard an accent. So I mentioned the Controller Group. Is this too loud, Joe? How are we doing here?
You guys okay with that?
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, with the air, it's good.
So I mentioned the Controller Group is a little bit of history on me. So I founded the Controller Group really out of necessity back in 2001 after a .com stint, and started consulting, doing finance and accounting consulting. Kind of picked up more work than I could do anything about, so I started hiring some folks, and before you knew it, we had a real company. And we grew that company to about $20 million in revenue over the next 5 years, and we sold it to Tatum, Tatum CFO, if you're familiar with them, back in 2006. And then I moved to Austin in 2002. So one other point of reference that is relevant for you guys, most of my clients, ever since I really started my entire career, I've been in professional services. So I work with a lot of companies, and I deal mainly with what I call high growth middle market. Joe talked about it a little bit. Generally 10 to $200 million of revenue is who most of our clients and most of the folks I deal with. So that's kind of the lens I'm dealing with. The other thing that you'll see is they typically grow north of 20%. So they're going through some radical change. And again, there's they're going through something special, but it's no different than what maybe a Dell or a American Airlines or anybody else growing quickly, or even a GeniusDen or any of you guys growing quickly. You have some of the same challenges my clients have. So just know that's the lens I'm talking it through. And Vern Harnish calls them gazelles, if you're familiar with Vern Harnish, which I know a lot of people probably are. And the last thing is we're here to talk about teams and really building teams to not just survive and have a nice lifestyle business, but teams to scale your business. And there's a big difference, and we'll get into that a little bit. You're going to learn from, I'm going to talk about some of my successes, but to be candid, I'm going to be very raw and tell you a bunch of failures. I'm a big fan of learning from your mistakes, and there's no better lesson in life than hitting your knees and realizing that you made a mistake or you goofed up something and learning from it, and getting back up and doing it better next time. So you're going to hear some of that as well. So moving on to what we want to talk about. We've all heard of the cost of a bad hire. You know that if you make a bad hire, it's going to cost X number of dollars. I've heard anywhere from 15 times someone's annual salary or something like that. And that's all true. If you make a bad hire, it's going to cost you. I think some of that is a little bit of kind of the HR wonks, with all due respect to HR wonks. It's a little bit of them trying to scare you into being very careful and don't make a bad hire. But what I like to think about is, what if we flip the script? What if you made a great hire? So instead of being concerned that you're going to fail, it's concerned about what we could do if we really hit a home run. So, if you had somebody on your team, let's say that and I'll use my example. I'm pretty good at sales and relationships and working with clients. I suck at execution and operations. But what if I had somebody on my team who was my right hand, who could really drive that for me, drive our company's execution? What if I had somebody who could drive the marketing efforts, build a sales organization that could run our finance and accounting function to scale us to 40 million? What if I had all those people around me? A huge difference. I could write my own ticket. And so my weaknesses, I'd surround myself with people with their strengths, and I could be much stronger. So that's what I want to talk about, is those game changers. When I use the term game changer, I'm thinking about somebody who's kind of been there and done that, is one phrase you might hear. Somebody who's fought the battles successfully. Somebody who's already traveled the road that you're looking to travel. I call those game changers because those folks bring a wealth of experience that you don't have to the table. So some people call me, I say this too much, but I recognize that you all heard the phrase, the smartest person in the room, right? Somebody the smartest person in the room. First of all, I'm not saying I'm the smartest person in the room. Joe is obviously the smartest person in the room. But first of all, that's not a compliment to be considered the smartest person in the room, in my opinion. In fact, I tell my team all the time that if I'm the smartest person in the room, then I'm in the wrong damn room, because I need people around me that are smarter. And if you're able to have the confidence to hire people that are smarter than you and surround yourself with them and let them run, you are miles ahead of anybody else. If you're so concerned about your own ego or the way you're perceived by someone else, that you have to hire someone that's below you, you're destined to a long term of struggle, because your team is never going to get over it. So that's a lesson I learned the hard way. And I'll tell you, I'm going to give an example, and I'm going to tell you, everybody in this room has got somebody on their team like this. But in the late 90s, I worked for a .com. I was the controller. And I was Big Four, I was Ernst & Young pedigree, I was a CPA, this smart accountant. And the reality is I'd never done this before. I'd always worked in consulting. I'd never done it myself. And so when my CEO asked me to do things, I'm like, yeah, I can do it. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, so I'm making it up. And so when I'm there to hire somebody, I'm hiring people that I didn't want to expose me. I didn't realize this at the time what was happening, but the reality is I was probably hiring people that were below me because I didn't want to be seen as a fraud. And what I did after the end of the road is I built a team of underachievers. We worked our ass off. We were hardworking, ethical, everything else you'd want in an employee, but we weren't a very good accounting employee. The great thing is we never made any revenue or any money anyway, so we didn't have anything to count. That's another story. But I guarantee you, there's people on your team right now that are hiring below them because either they're concerned about the way they appear, they're too busy, which is another reason that happens, or they're too lazy. And so that happens a lot. So you fast forward a little bit, and I learned from my mistakes. I found that the controller group we talked about, again, kind of out of necessity, but that's how I think a lot of entrepreneurs are built, kind of out of necessity or out of being laid off or something like that. And I learned that while I've got my strengths, I'm very good at certain things. I'm very good at connecting. I'm very good at relationships. I'm very good at solving problems. In fact, I try to solve my wife's problems all the time, and she doesn't appreciate it. But my strengths are not operations. My strengths are not accounting. And so what I learned is I need to surround myself with people that can do that. And so I think I mentioned that the controller group was a finance and accounting consulting firm, which is a little bit weird. A bad accountant starts an accounting consulting firm. But again, I was able to surround myself with people that were strong. And I want to tell you, use an example. Again, there are people on your team who are bad accountants, they're bad technology professionals, they're bad salespeople, and they've risen through the ranks, and they're building a team around them that are not adequate to get you to the next level. When you were a startup and you had all hiring within your purview and you were able to meet everybody, you maybe had a better handle on it, but now that you've started beating that up to other folks and having them help you hire, they're making mistakes that hard to fix. And sometimes you can still grow. Sometimes you can still grow nice and steady, but if you're really trying to make that inflection point or really trying to get to the proverbial next level, it ain't going to happen with all those folks. So I asked the question, does any of this sound familiar? Does anybody have anybody on their team that's overwhelmed or in over their head or anything like that? I thought you worked by yourself. So again, the beauty is I know this about myself. And after we sold the controller group, I worked there for the next 3 years, kind of building that and growing that to, I think we ended up about $40 million. And I was kind of looking to see what I wanted to do next. As Joe said, I've done some angel investing, I've done some consulting, and I really determined that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to really put all my energy and my capital and people behind something I could believe in. And so we actually I made a couple failed attempts at buying some other businesses, and we stumbled upon HireBetter and Jonathan Davis that Joe talked about. And I looked at the world that I was familiar with, which is this high-growth middle market world. And I firmly believe that if you have capital and if you have talent, any entrepreneur can do anything if you've got those two things. And I'll just kind of paint a picture. If you have capital, you can weather some storms. You can weather the economy. You can weather 9/11. You can weather Katrina or Obamacare or something like that. If you have a bad team, you're just going to be stuck in a mire. If you have a team that can flex and make opportunities out of those challenges. I was talking earlier with Bree about competition in the tech space. Competition is opportunity. Challenges equals opportunity. So if you're looking and staring at your face and say, wow, the economy sucks, or I can't find talent, that's an opportunity for you to make it. And good talent can help you make that happen, if that makes sense. So I passionately believe that those two things can drive change, especially in this kind of high-growth space. So what if that space is if talent is so important to what we're doing to try to grow companies, it's so important, why is it served, with all due respect to the recruiters in the room and all recruiters elsewhere, it's served by a relatively shady industry. The recruiters recruiting industry has built a bad reputation. We've got a transaction, a broker, a used car salesman, whatever you want to use. A lot of us have had bad experiences with the recruiters. We've also had some good ones, but as a whole, it's a tough industry. So I looked at the space, I looked at the need, and I determined this is an area that I want to sink my teeth into because I want to use this next stage of my career to make a difference in the talent world. So that's kind of where we came up with in HireBetter. And the interesting thing about that, if I'm being totally transparent, I told you I'm a bad accountant. I'm also a bad interviewer. And my problem is probably a lot of entrepreneurs, I want to like everybody. And so I promise you, if we go to lunch or whatever, we're going to, or have a cup of coffee, I'm going to find something to like about you, even Joe. And whether you went to Arkansas, whether you got kids, or whether you played sports, or whether you whatever, I'm going to find something I like about you. So when I interview like that. I want to find whatever I like about you, and I'm going to say, man, there's an opportunity here for this person to come work for us. It doesn't always work. And I promise you, people on your team probably interview the same way. You've all kind of been down at the lunch table or a coffee table, and you sit down with somebody to interview them, and you hit it off. Like, yeah, I want to hire this person. Well, tell me about their background. I don't know, he plays golf. And that's kind of the mentality. The good thing is, I recognize this about myself. And I've surrounded myself with a team who can vet, screen, qualify the shit out of you, pardon my French, to make sure that you're a good fit for the team. My job as CEO is to then sell you on the vision of what we're building and to sell you on the opportunity that we've got for you. With the hope that my team has done a great enough job screening that now I'm kind of in sales mode versus vending mode. And that's, goes a little bit to tell you what a beautiful country we live in, that a bad accountant and a bad interviewer can start two consulting firms and be very successful. But that's what you can do with talent around you. So perform an honest appraisal of your team. And what I mean by that is know what your capabilities are. If you're, let's say, $20 million in revenue now, and you have your sights set on $40 million in 3 or 4 years, that's pretty rapid growth. And so if you take a step back, before you go out and hire a bunch of people because somebody told you you needed to, take a step back, think about where you're going as an organization. You're 20 million now, going to 40. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, I'm going to open an office in Houston. Maybe I'm going to launch a new product, or I'm going to acquire a competitor. All those answers are unique, and they all require a different skill set. So then let's appraise our existing team. So I usually have 8 functional areas that I think of when I do this exercise. Leadership, finance, operations, marketing, sales. You can kind of go through the functional areas. And think about who's leading each of those areas. I'm happy to share those with you. Who's leading those functional areas? And then I ask 2 questions, really simple questions. The first question is, can this person get me, do they have the skills and the expertise or experience to get me from $20 to $40 million? And be honest with yourself. Okay? Maybe, great guy, good friend, done yeoman's work, does anything I ask him to, he's in over his head. Let's be honest. Second question is, knowing today about what you know about your company and what you know about this employee, would you, this is a Vern Harnish term again if you're a Vern Harnish fan, would you enthusiastically rehire them to do the same job? And it's Again, simple question. Simple exercise, but it's so powerful if you're honest. Because what you're going to find is exactly what I just described. Good people that you would go to war with, and there may be a great individual contributor. People get promoted all the time. We call it a title inflation. Get promoted all the time. Now I'm the CFO of a company when I'm really a controller at best, or I'm a sales manager, VP of sales. Got 5 people that report to me. I'm a great sales guy. I suck as a manager. But that's the other thing we see a lot. Okay. Actually, I've got a good example for you. So one of our clients is in Indianapolis, an insurance company. They're about $37 million in revenue, and they're about 15, 20-year-old company. They grew nice and steady over the years, and they built up a huge staff. And they were founder-led, and the 2 founders were very hands-on, and so they kind of had their fingerprints on everything. So as a result, they had no leadership team around them. They had a group of folks who kind of did what they were told, and they had become almost, I've used the phrase governmental in nature, with all due respect to people who work for the government. And so there wasn't a lot of go-getter mentality, and we're going to get to $70 million type of mentality. In fact, when the founders went in and said, hey, Obamacare has given us this great opportunity to go out and double our company, everyone said, no, we can't do that, shying away from it, almost afraid of revenue. And so they brought us in, and we kind of did an assessment. We did that exercise I just described, and the answers were no, 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 maybe, no, yes, maybe, no. And just eye-opening what you can see. So it's a powerful exercise.
So did you use assessment tools?
We have a tool we call a strategic talent plan. It's not rocket science. It's something we created from leveraging other folks' work. So it's I beg, borrow, and steal from everything I can. I'm happy to share any of that stuff with you guys. Well, just make a note of what you want. I'll send you.
Sure.
Another example, and this is, I think, going to resonate with most of you guys. We've all seen some example of this where an entrepreneur has a company, has some growth, needs somebody to keep his books, or her books, and so their fraternity brother, sorority sister in college, took 3 years of accounting, they trust him, why don't you come and keep my books for me? And so they learn QuickBooks, and they're trusted, and they kind of do a little part-time deal. A year later, they're able to take them on full-time, so now they call themselves a controller. And 3 or 4 years later, the title inflation becomes CFO. The company's now $5 or $10 million, and so they're actually a real company. And then as the company continues to scale, the CFO is trying to do more creative things. They're trying to negotiate a $10 million bank loan. They're trying to sign a merger agreement. They're doing stuff that they have no idea what they're doing. And sometimes you can mentor that and coach that and help that, and sometimes they're simply in over their heads. And so we see that a lot, where it doesn't mean it's a bad person. Let's maybe put that person back in the controller role or individual contributor role and bring in somebody who's kind of been there and done that again, to steal that term. So that might resonate with you guys, maybe not. We see it a lot in that area, also the sales area. Okay, the next one. All right, so plan, be proactive, and be patient. So what do I mean when I say that? First of all, I know most of the people in this room are probably not patient, or probably don't plan very well, so I completely appreciate that because I'm not either. What I'm saying is, most people when they're hiring, they hire quickly, and they hire whoever's available. They hire somebody who's out of work or a friend of a friend. It happens all the time. But let's plan for what we're going to do. If we do this exercise up above and we determine what we need long term, let's make a hiring plan for the next 12 to 18 months so we can be proactive with our hiring. Instead of reactionary and fly by the seat of our pants and, oh shit, my hair's on fire, I gotta hire somebody today. Let's hire somebody for 4 months from now. Then I can take my time and I can make a great hire if I can be proactive about my hiring. So leverage yourself and play to your strengths. What do I mean when I say that? Most people, most entrepreneurs especially, try to do everything themselves. Nobody is better at me than that. I've got to be the one that meets with that customer. Or nothing gets out of this door without me seeing it because it's so important to the market. I've got to go put all the marketing material or anything like that. The problem is it's not scalable. I think we can all agree it's not scalable. We also, the term a lot of people use is called the founder's trap. It's where you kind of get stuck in this kind of never land where you're doing everything yourself. Happens all the time. This is a little bit what I was talking about before. We're hiring somebody that complements you. So if you're the sales guy, let's go out and find somebody who's the operator. So I've got a couple of examples here, and one that you'll really care about, and one that you won't. And I'll start with the one that you won't, since the one that you won't is myself. So I mentioned that I know where my strengths are. And so with the controller group, I had a partner who was an ops guy. He handled all the back office stuff. He handled all of our billable hours, all of our employees, all of that stuff. Well, I get to focus on clients and relationships and alliances. And it worked great, because I had complete trust and faith in him and vice versa. With HireBetter, I didn't have that. I was doing it on my own, and I kind of fell into this founder's trap. I thought I had the operations person that was strong enough to do it, one of my former employees, and I did exactly to her what I described that these good folks do with their CFO. I expected her to be more than she was capable of, and I set her up to fail, put her in a position to fail, and it sucked. And I love her to death, but she's not that operations partner. So as a matter of fact, right now I'm hiring a chief operating officer that I'm bringing in to essentially be my right hand and really help us scale, because again, it happens to all of us. So the example that you will care about, some of you have heard, or I think in some of the commercial material, we have Deep Ellum listed there. Deep Ellum is a client, and Clayton Christopher, who founded Deep Ellum, is a friend. And I'll tell you the story. It's a case study of ours, and I love it. It's a great story. So if you're familiar with Sweet Leaf Tea, most of you may be. It's a national tea brand that's an honest tea, Arizona tea. They were sold to Nestle a few years ago. And the way to give you some background, it was founded basically, and you can read this on his bottle, it was founded in his grandmother's bathroom, or his grandmother's house. And they actually brewed tea in his grandmother's bathtub with pillowcases to hold the tea. And it's a great story about, and they bottle it in the garage, and that's where they started. And they grew over an 11-year period. They grew to $15 million in revenue. And the way they did it the old-fashioned way, I like to say. They rolled up their sleeves. They worked 24 hours a day. They hired interns. They hired cousins, and their mom who packed the boxes, and everything that you could think of a startup would do, they did. And they got there. They got there, again, to $15 million, which I think we can all agree is a great success. And then about that time, they had attracted Nestle, who came in and put in, they didn't buy them, but they put in an investment, some investment capital, and said, let's take this to the next level. So they immediately brought in the sales expertise, people who had the relationships with the distributors and with the retailers and everybody out there. They had the operations experience, people who had scaled CPG companies and similar ilk. And they, again, essentially bought experience from other folks. And their revenue and their profitability did that. And 3 years later, they sold to Nestle, the whole thing, for $183 million. So great success story. I mean, very few people have that kind of success. So fast forward a couple of years when he founded Deep Ellum vodka. And he and I had some really candid conversations, and he said, Kurt, I've seen the light. I've seen what it looks like. If I can hire people who've got the experience, I can get there faster. So what I want to do, quote, I want to buy Rolodexes. I want to buy their experiences. I want to bring people in who have that experience. I think it was year 2 when he brought in the CEO. And I'm not suggesting that everybody brings in a CEO to replace them, but I am suggesting that you can bring in people who have that experience. So in Clayton's case, they grew to $15 million, Deep Ellum, in 3 years, versus 11 years for Sweet Leaf Tea. So again, amplified growth. The rest of that story, that's not our case study, but soon will be, is Deep Ellum sold about a month ago to Heaven Hill in Kentucky for a rumor between $350 and $400 million. So if anybody asks me what we want to be as a firm, we want to be the firm that can amplify growth, because everybody's capable of it if you can build yourself with a great team. So just to repeat again on the hiring the number 2, I can't tell you how important that is to hire somebody who complements your skill set. We see it very often with the sales-minded person bringing in the ops-minded person. All right, so if you've appraised your team, you've planned, and you're proactive, and you actually leverage yourself, what is like the one key takeaway that you can go home with? I'm not going to write this down because it's what could you actually do to really try to make yourself better? It's something you can take home tonight. What can I do? And my answer is this. It is, take a look in the mirror. And I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but if you're trying to attract a game changer that can really amplify your growth, take a look at what you have to offer. Because game changers aren't trolling job boards. They're not looking at LinkedIn. They're not looking at Monster or Career Builder or any of these other boards looking for jobs. They're gainfully employed and they're building someone else's company. So when you're able to find them, in order to attract them, you need to have a story. Most people in the high growth space, when they find somebody that they want to hire, they're used to hiring people off of job boards. So again, with all due respect to anybody on job boards, it is not hard to attract somebody who found you on a job board. All you have to do is say, here's a paycheck, for the most part. But if you're trying to find somebody that's gainfully employed at awesome GeniusDen, you're trying to pull them over to HireBetter, I've got to have a story. Not only do I have to have a story that sells them, but I also have to attract them with a market or above market compensation. I've got to attract them with a good place to work. I've got to sell them in the interview process. If I bring them in, like a lot of companies do, and I have a freshly printed resume on my desk, and I say, hey, Bree, tell me why you left IT Solutions. And then 4 people in your company asking the same flippant questions, you're never going to attract a good person. You're going to attract the outer work person, but you're not going to attract the game changer. So that's, I think, the biggest thing I can tell you to do is be attractive and sell yourself. There's so many times, even some of our best clients, not our best clients, some of our clients, we can attract, we can find and identify game-changing, awesome talent. But when they go in for the interview, if they're treated like that, there's no way you're going to get them to come work for you. So, kind of step up your game. Yes, ma'am.
How many clients do you have that have really executed the plan and be proactive well? Because I run into so many times, it's just a matter of how they've budgeted for that year. So it's, okay, now I have the allocated funds, I've got approval, now I can hire for it, but I needed it 4 months ago. You know, how have you seen that executed really well?
Yeah, our challenge is we don't sell to HR people or to the hiring managers. We have to sell to the CEO because they get that and they can find room in the budget. If we're selling to the HR people, they feel threatened. And if we're selling to the hiring manager, they just have a pain they need solved now. They don't really care about the rest of it. So it's really a C-level type of discussion. But it does happen, and there's our clients that don't get it, and we don't work with them. A great point. Yes, ma'am.
What if you have like an immediate need? You know, like a client just landed on you and you just don't have the people to deal with it, you know?
Generally, or what we would do?
Yes, generally. And what would you do?
Yeah. Generally, there are a lot of good people out there that you could bring in for a kind of an emergency situation as a consultant. I would encourage you not to hire really quickly because it's harder to unwind that. It depends on the situation. If it's a modest level position that it's easy to fill, great. But if it's at an executive level or VP level, I would take your time.
Okay.
And what we do is we actually started a staffing division which solves immediate problems. Just in finance and accounting, we don't do the other stuff.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
About compensation and benefits, tell me about what you do to help retain quality talent.
Great question. You can attract and sign them up, but if you can't retain them, you're screwed. You know, do you want to talk about retention, or you want to talk about compensation, or both?
Yes.
So my belief is, and I think other people share this belief, people come for the money, or they come for maybe the company or the sizzle. They stay for other reasons, and we got to find out what that reason is. Maybe it's for a manager, maybe it's somebody that they work with, they love, maybe it's the brand, maybe it's the healthy living, maybe it's the commute, maybe it's the compensation. But understand, try to find what that key is that drives them and what keeps them there. And some people call it a stay interview. You've heard of an exit interview? Think of a stay interview. Why are you here? What can we do to make your life easier, your job better? We value you and we want to dig into that as an example.
So would you say that it's different for everybody? It's not standardized?
I personally believe that, but I'm sure the industry probably thinks that there's an easy answer in technology and so on.
Do you have any thoughts or ideas around golden handcuffs?
So gold, just to define golden handcuff, a way to keep you to stay. You get a bonus.
Yeah.
Or the benefit package, right?
So I'll just ramble for a second and I'd love your thoughts on that. My belief is that if you need golden handcuffs to keep them, they might not want to stay. And it can be awkward. I would rather, just for my own company, I would rather have you stay because you like the work that you're doing, you like the people you're working with, and I prefer not to do that. But I have had clients who've had great success with, someone makes up to maybe like half their bonus goes into a pool that they get in 5 years. It just kind of seems awkward if you're having to stick around for that long to get a big check. I mean, are you really happy? I don't know.
How about equity compensation?
You gonna take all the questions?
Yes.
Okay, what do you mean by, actually, the other gentleman had a question, but I'll go get equity compensation. So what's the question?
How about compensating people with equity?
How to compensate people with equity?
Would you believe in that?
Okay. I still believe in it. I know after the dot-com bust, there were a lot of people that got burned by it, didn't really appreciate it. And as the CEO, I'll tell you that people don't appreciate equity as much as you think they would. And that most people, equity is different, but most people appreciate cash, cold hard cash, much more than they appreciate equity. When we sold the controller group, we didn't have an equity package, but we compensated people as if we did. So we kind of put a pool of money and said, we're going to pay, if you've been here for 5 years and your compensation is this, we'll kind of come up with a calculation. And there's nothing worse than doing something nice for people and giving them a slug of money and having them be unappreciative. So the people that got the $1,000 were like ecstatic. The people that got the $50,000 were like, oh, look at Kirk gave you this much money, asshole. So it's tough. I don't know if that answered your question. Yes, sir. Let me see if I recapture what you said. The first part was, what if you're going so quickly you don't have time to be proactive? I think was part of it. The other part of it is, what if you made hiring mistakes and you realize a couple years down the road that you made hiring mistakes? Is that right?
Yep.
So when I say be proactive, it's sometimes you can't. Especially at the store level, you've got to get stores cranking and you need people. You probably have a pretty good system around that. Most people don't have a good system around executive level hires. And that's where I would for sure take your time. Don't hire, you might maybe hire a consultant, but I wouldn't hire a permanent employee at the executive level quickly. I don't know if that answers your first part, but let me address the second one. If they're underperforming, or if they have a bad attitude, or if you're losing customers over it, in my opinion, you're the last to know. Their teammates probably already know, and they're wondering when the hell you're going to fire these people. It's just reality. And so, the sooner you can move on this, the better. I don't know about calling a meeting and getting rid of 50 people. That's a little different. I wouldn't encourage that unless you really were hitting the skids or something. But, Jack Welch believes in getting rid of the bottom 10% every year. I think that's a little draconian, but I think there is an element of making sure that all your people, you rehire again. Remember the question, would you enthusiastically rehire them again to do the same job? And I think that's a healthy exercise, actually. And rarely are you gonna fire somebody who's underperforming, bad attitude, not showing up or whatever, and anybody's gonna be pissed.
So how diligent are you on background checks?
So there's different kinds of background checks. If you're talking about like reference checks and things, or
Well, tell us about it.
okay, great question. Okay, so there's multiple kinds of background checks in our opinion. There's reference checks where you're just checking to see if someone's a good person or did their job or that kind of stuff. There's credit checks, seeing what their credit looks like. There's criminal reports and things like that. Anything I'm missing? Are you asking me because I'm the expert?
Guy, yeah.
Oh shit! I told you I didn't know how to do anything. That's, let me call my team and see what we should say. So I believe that the traditional reference check is a little bit crappy. That's the one where you say, give me 3 references and I'm going to call them, because it's their sister and their brother-in-law and their coworkers. Now, if you're a fan of Top Grading and Brad Smart and Jeff Smart with what they've done, they have a thing that they call threat of reference check, which is where you actually ask during your interview, you say, hey, so you were at Technology Professionals and you did such and such. I'd really like to talk to your, who did you do that project with? I'd really like to talk to Joe. Can you connect me with Joe? And so just that alone is enough to to have somebody either not want to do the job anymore because you're going to call Joe, or you can at least get them to be open for you talking to Joe. With our clients, if we're doing everything above board, we're actually are going to try to find folks who work with them that aren't on the reference list, and we're going to call and get their permission to call. I think that's a roundabout way of saying that we're legal, I'm not.
That's what LinkedIn is for.
Exactly. The other thing was the other check. So if you're hiring anybody in the finance department or anything kind of in your operations, handling cash, or having access to inventory, that kind of stuff, do a credit check. It's relatively easy. Again, I'm not an HR professional, so that might not be legal. Is that legal, Joe? I think it's legal.
Sure it is, yeah.
Yeah. As long as they sign off on it, that they're
Yeah, permitted credit check.
yeah. And then the other is criminal. And criminal can, now I think legally you can't hire, or you can't fire, you can't not hire them based on something that you find, but it can allow you to ask questions about it. So things like a DWI or child porn or something like that, maybe you can ask about. If it's if you have a, I'm going to give you my one piece of HR advice, and that is if you have a handbook, employee handbook, you should spell out things that you would. You know this, Bree? I just want to make sure I'm not telling anything wrong. If you want to not hire somebody because they have a DWI or because child porn or whatever, you should have that kind of stuff in your handbook, and then you can point to anybody that says we're not hiring you because of this. You can't just blatantly say we're not hiring you because of this. I'm better at the culture stuff, the other stuff. Anybody have a non-HR?
That's another startup speaker series lecture, yeah.
Perfect.
How not to get sued.
Well, it's interesting. I told you we don't really work with HR professionals much, and even though I think it's a great career. HR professionals and anybody who has their own company, if you're an HR person, you typically have 30 things that you're responsible for. You've got a big job. You've got everything people related. But you're only fired for missing certain things. You're fired if you miss compliance filing, you miss payroll, you screw up benefits, you know, any of these types of things. You're not typically fired for not being able to hire, because there's always an excuse. Joe's a jerk, we're not paying enough money, whatever. So you don't get fired for that. And you also don't get fired for having a crappy culture. It's just a kind of innate thing that you can't really measure. You can measure missing the compliance filing. That's my little piece on the HR industry. How many people have I pissed off tonight? Because how many brokers, how many? Yes, sir.
I was just going to tell you, you were talking about credit checks. You want to be very careful when you do that. As soon as you do a credit check on someone, you're subject to the Consumer Protection Act. And you can violate that in all kinds of ways without even realizing it.
That's why I shouldn't be allowed to answer the question.
If you can avoid doing credit check, you should avoid doing it.
You know,
You can't. If you do a credit check on anyone, you're subject to the Consumer Protection Act. Nothing. Maybe.
We can pass a credit check at this point. I mean,
You want to just repeat that? So
yeah, I think what he said was if you want to try to avoid doing a credit check because you have to comply with the Consumer Credit Act at that point.
Credit Protection Act. I don't remember the full legal name, but basically once you do the credit check, you're automatically subject to that. And it's just like a parallel would be, what do you call it when you take credit cards?
PCI.
Yeah, the PCI compliance. It's similar to that, but much more stringent. It's been around many more decades, and it's not something you want to be on the wrong side of. So if you can avoid credit checks, do it. And I don't know why you want to do a credit check just to hire someone.
Well, if you're hiring a CFO or an accountant, something like that, and I hear you on that. I do suggest you consult a professional on that because there's some cases where I would definitely suggest it. To this point, not in that case.
So Kurt, I'm going to ask my cleanup batter question, and then we can ask one more, unless there's two more, if that's okay.
Okay.
And then we can always talk afterwards as we're wrapping up and putting the tables up. And anybody wants to help us move chairs is welcome to. Tell us about how important it is for you looking at the resume, which is my marketed version of what I want you to believe, versus a career history form. Do you use them? How valuable do you think they are? And how much how many discount points do you take off for someone that's taken time off to take care of for a reasonable reason, like take care of a loved one or go on the vacation of their life for a while? I know a number of people that are really career-minded and are a little afraid of taking that 6 months off, and they feel like that's going to be a gap in their resume. I know obviously that someone who's, I sat around and watched TV and was in depression is someone that you don't want to hire.
That doesn't go on the resume.
That doesn't go on the resume. So in a career history form, tell us a little bit about the gaps of employment and how you tend to see those with A players, successful team members, that sort of stuff. Can you talk on that?
I can speak very high level on this one because the career history form is a top grading concept, and it kind of goes through your career history as it describes. We don't really use those anymore,
Okay.
so I can't speak too much on that. But I will tell you that a resume it's a lot of fluff, right? Because it's what we want everybody to hear or see. The reality is, as much as we try to get our clients off of resumes, we try to give them a little bit more of a story. So we're gonna, when we work with our clients, we give them a profile of exactly what this person has accomplished, why we think they're great for a job, why there's things you need to ask them, some concerns, but really it's a story. And what most clients want to do is look at the resume. And I don't think most clients probably even understand the concept of what you just described.
Okay. So what about career gaps? Pardon, follow-up question.
Good question. So a lot of what I'm going to tell you is probably the opposite of what most people would tell you. I believe that I want to understand what the career gap is and make my own decision about whether it's valid or not. And I think there's probably a portion of the industry that would say, you took 6 months off, you probably were drinking beer, sitting around watching, Beavis and Butthead. Did that age me?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
My turn? No.
Oh, sure.
Go for it.
Oh wait, let me ask my second question. What's used now instead of career history forms?
For our company?
Sure.
We have, we do follow some of the concepts. We try to understand when we paint a picture with our clients of what we want this person to accomplish. We call it a blueprint. When we are scoping out a job, we create what we call a blueprint. And it's not a job description. It's more of because the job description is usually cobbled together from some bullshit wish list that they get off of the Google search for controller job description. And we build a a blueprint position profile. What do we want this person to accomplish? What does 90 days look like? What does 1 year look like? What does success look like? And then we try to identify candidates who have that same experience. And when we see it or hear it, we ask and validate it. So that's our approach is more, you say you've implemented SAP, talk me through that how that went. And that's where we might identify the people we talk to about it. It's all about their experience.
Okay, thanks.
There are some people that just want aptitude and attitude, especially in the retail space, and that's great too. But for what we're doing, we're typically looking for experience and expertise.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir.
Well, when you're talking to a client and they say, I want to go from 10 million to 15 next year, you start thinking about the plan of, okay, here's our hiring plan. Are you usually trying to do a 12-month plan, or are you doing a 6-month plan? And then when you talk to the potential hires, are you going to them and telling them, okay, here's what your career path will look like, 2, 3, 4 years down the road, or are you just saying, hey, here's what you have to do right now?
Yeah, good question. On the first part, we would typically try to line out 12 to 18 months. The reality is in these companies, things change so rapidly. So the 3-month plan may change even more. So we can typically identify the first couple of key hires, and that's where we would start, or we would encourage them to start. And then we would check in like every quarter and keep kind of redoing the next 12 to 18 months, if that makes sense. Your next question about the career path. So again, the market we're dealing with is this high growth middle market. There's not a lot there's a career path, but it's more, we don't know what it's going to look like, but we'll know when we get there. As opposed to like in the big companies, you can say, well, in 2 years you're going to do this, in 4 years you're going to do this. We don't have that luxury in the high growth in this space. So it's really about selling the opportunity that we have today, and because we're growing, there's always opportunities for growth. And people who appreciate that, they're great candidates for your employees. People who want the title or want they want to know what their next step is because they, whatever reason, maybe not. Sure.
My question has to do with the amplified growth, using Deep Ellum as an example. You said that the second time around he hired people that are better than him to excel his growth, right? How do you know when that right moment is? Do you think that the right time to hire up is a dollar amount? Is it calendar year? When do you know it's right? Because I also believe that if you're hiring somebody, at least if this is your first time around, that you should know enough, especially if you're in a higher position like a CEO, enough to be dangerous at every position, right? You don't want to just hire somebody that's accounting, you know nothing about accounting, and then all of a sudden you find out 5 years later that they disappeared to the Bahamas for $10 million or something. So when's the right moment?
It's a good question.
Can you kind of rephrase, repeat?
Yeah, so the question essentially, I think, is if you're growing rapidly, how do you know when the right time is to bring in those executive level hires and really take the leap, both monetarily and personally, to make those big hires? And if, especially your first time through and not your second time through this kind of transition, how do you know? Is it a dollar amount? Is it a growth rate? Is it a 3 years in, or whatever this number may be? I think the simplest way to put it, I would think, would be when we're, as entrepreneurs, we are working around the clock and we're doing things that we struggle at and that maybe we're not that good at, that's definitely a red flag. That we need to, there's somebody better that can do that. I've got friends that have $14 million businesses and they're still doing the flipping account as a CEO. And trust me, there's people better at them than that, and they can pay $50,000 for somebody to do that, and they can go create $10 million worth of value. So when those types of things are happening, you'll know. If it's your second time through, you'll just have that experience. And I can't say enough for groups of folks who surrounding yourself with folks who've done it before. So in my case, I'm very active in YPO down in Austin. It's a young presidents organization. Great organization. There's other ones. There's 3 or 4 chapters here in town. There's EO, which is typically smaller companies, but similar type of concept. So a young entrepreneurs organization, now called EO. There's other professional organizations where you can surround yourself with people like you that are having the same or have had the same challenges. And then you can have people to bounce off of. There's
And
also
GeniusDen.
And there's GeniusDen. I didn't know you did that.
That's a part of what we're
Well, I think that's true. Hanging out with folks who,
community founders, yeah.
Absolutely, great point. Thanks for that. And then there's business coaches and professionals who can help you with some of that. I understand you, or is that?
There's also Fort Worth, which is a co-working space. It has a lot of founders and a lot of great stuff. Warren's here and runs Fort Worth. So Dallas is filled with phenomenal collections of smart people, and get plugged in if you're not already to one of these.
Yeah, let me touch on that for a second. You didn't ask this question, but let me phrase it. Let me say it. People who have had success, most of them want to help. And so you would not believe if you gave a phone call to somebody and said, the name of your company, and said, I would really love to pick your brain on something, can I buy a coffee? You would get probably 5 out of 10 people who would say yes. At least in Austin. Maybe the number is a little less here or whatever, but you're still going to get some good people that would be willing to share. And that's a great idea. Talk through your challenges and know. I didn't mean to take a dig at Dallas. I just take a dig at Dallas.
Yeah, you did.
I think that was not a...
You can't help it, I know.
Life's too short to live in Dallas. Oh! That's what we say in Austin, sorry. Anyway, I guess I'll wrap up before I get hit. Any other questions?
We're going to laser you.
Thanks for having me, guys.